Hey guys, welcome back to Learning Curve Tech, where I learn tech with you. So as you know, I have been gone from this channel for quite a long time now. In fact, it's been about 4 months since the last time I uploaded a video. Now, I haven't really just been doing nothing during this time because, in fact, I've been shooting wedding videos for the past 5 to 6 months. Now, I started shooting wedding videos back in January of this year, and I've shot 5 so far. Now you might think, well, if you've only shot 5, wouldn't you have time to make more YouTube videos? Well, not exactly. See, each wedding video took about a month, 3 weeks to a month to edit. I also had to do school full time, so really the only time that I had that was available after school was used for editing videos for weddings. Now, if you saw the last video that was uploaded like 4 months ago, you know that I have had many different cameras over the years. First, I started off with that little Sony point and shoot, then I went to the Nikon, then I went to the Canon, which I started this channel on. Then in January of 2021, I bought the Panasonic GH4. Now that camera pretty much changed everything in the way I work. First of all, I went from 1080 to 4K. And also, it was the first camera I had that actually had a flip screen, which made it 10 times easier to record videos. The last camera I bought was the Gh5 Mark II. I bought this camera only about 2 months ago, so it's relatively brand new. This camera has pretty much reached legendary status at this point. A lot of people love using the Gh5. Anybody from wedding videographers to YouTubers to people who just want to shoot short films. However, I know when I was watching reviews on this camera before I bought it, I noticed that a lot of people really don't like this camera. Now, I hate to call out names, but one of the top examples I could think of is Matt, who is Matt Johnson. Now, Matt Johnson is a fantastic wedding videographer. His channel is amazing, and if you're somebody who wants to shoot weddings, definitely go check it out. Now, when Matt Johnson made his video about the Gh5 3 or 4 years ago, he had a list of things that he didn't like about the camera, and also some things that he did like about the camera. Now, I understand he is somebody who is coming from the viewpoint of a Sony full-frame user, so he is used to those kinds of cameras. However, he had a list of things he didn't really like about the Gh5. So today I'm going to answer those concerns for you about the Gh5 and whether it is worth the money or not. Now, the first concern that Matt Johnson mentioned was the low light capabilities of the Gh5. Now, the Gh5 has what is known as a micro four thirds sensor, so it is a much smaller sensor than something like a full frame camera. The most major difference between a full frame camera and a micro four thirds camera is that micro four thirds cameras generally aren't as good in low light. In Matt's review, he mentioned that he just didn't like the low light capabilities of the Gh5 because it got noisy too quickly for him personally. Now, like he mentioned, you could use low aperture lenses to let in more light, but he thought that even with low aperture lenses, it still didn't look very good. Now, here's what I want to address about that concern. I do have a Gh5 Mark II, not a Gh5, but they are extremely similar with only a few differences, so they perform pretty much the same in low light. I've also only had it for about a month, so I haven't done super extensive tests, but from what I've seen so far, I think I can address those concerns about the low light issues. First of all, for someone like Matt Johnson, who is used to using the A7S III, or at the time he wrote the review, he was using the A7S II, he was used to something that could capture a tremendous amount of light. After all, the A7S series is pretty much the gold standard for low light capabilities. It makes sense that when he went to something like a Gh5, which isn't necessarily known for its low light, he probably thought it was pretty bad. His main concern about the camera was that the low light wouldn't be very good if you were in situations where you just couldn't have any lights. However, I would like to say that the majority of weddings are shot sometime during the day, with the receptions, of course, usually being during the late evening or nighttime. Now, here's why I think the low light capabilities of the Gh5 are more than enough for weddings. During the reception, you will not be shooting to make it look like daytime. It's nighttime, so you're gonna make it look like it's nighttime. For example, the last wedding I did had fireworks at the end of the wedding. Now, of course, it was pitch black and all I could see was the fireworks on the camera. I was worried that it was gonna be really noisy and grainy when I came back and started editing. But when I started editing, I realized it was not really noisy at all. This is because I didn't raise my ISO up to make the night look like day. At a wedding, you'll always have some sort of light source. And if you don't, you really just have to bring your own. No camera can shoot completely without light. If you watched Matt's video and you were concerned that the Gh5 just won't be enough for receptions or anything during the night, then just know that you really don't have to worry about the low light capabilities. It's actually perfectly usable. As long as you're using it like a normal camera, it's gonna be fine. I see what Matt's point was here, but for the vast majority of users, you will be bringing some sort of light or have some sort of light source in your scene already. Now, this second point is not necessarily something that Matt brought up, but a lot of other videographers have brought up about the Gh5. That is the autofocus performance. Now, to be perfectly fair, the Gh5 has terrible autofocus and you just don't want to use it at all. But then again, when should you ever really be using autofocus? Now, I would say maybe for some wide establishing shots, or maybe if you're really on the go and you just don't have enough time to focus it. But in reality, I found that manually focusing is first much more reliable, and also it's a lot less frustrating and usually faster than autofocus. I'd personally rather use manual focus because with autofocus, even with like a Canon camera, you're gonna find that the camera is focusing between the trees or the people, and it's just never gonna be where you want it to be. Plus, the Gh5 is practically made for manual focus. There's so many different tools that work incredibly well to help you do accurate manual focusing. So I found that during a real wedding day scenario, you're not really gonna have much trouble manual focusing with this camera. Now, the third main concern that people have with the Gh5 is not enough bokeh. Now, if you don't know what bokeh is, it's basically when the background is super blurry in a video. Because of the physics of a micro four thirds sensor, it just doesn't get as blurry of a background as easily. Now, I thought when I got the Gh5 that it wasn't gonna have enough bokeh for me. However, I found after using it for an entire wedding that it was absolutely fine. Before the Gh5, I used a Canon RP with a 24-70 f2.8 lens. Now, this was about twice as much background blur as what I have currently with the Gh5. But in my opinion, the Gh5 actually looked a lot better. I'll throw up some shots that I took with the Gh5, and you can decide for yourself whether they have enough bokeh or not. In my opinion, getting a shallow depth of field with the Gh5 was actually really easy. Plus, not having as much of a shallow depth of field as a full frame camera meant it was much easier to manual focus. Honestly, getting a blurry background has more to do with the distance you are from your subject and the focal length that your lens is at than it has to do with the camera's sensor size. For most people, the Gh5 has plenty of background blur and it just looks fantastic in general. So now that I've tried to answer those three main concerns that people have about the Gh5, I'm gonna give you some reasons that you should get it. Before we go through those reasons, please consider giving this video a like if you're finding it helpful. Thank you so much, and let's continue with all those reasons why you should definitely buy a Gh5 if you aren't already convinced enough. First of all, the cost. I did buy the Gh5 Mark II because it was a little bit newer, but honestly, just go ahead and buy the first Gh5. You can buy the original Gh5 for around $900 used, which is an absolute bargain if you ask me. The Gh5 Mark II is a little bit more expensive at around $1,400. So for most people, just don't buy the Gh5 Mark II, get the original one. There aren't really enough features to justify the Mark II. The only reason why you should ever get a Gh5 Mark II is if you need 4K 60 frames per second 10-bit 422 video. But in my opinion, for weddings, you don't really need 10-bit. I found that 8-bit was totally usable for color grading. Plus, 10-bit files just make the whole workflow a lot more difficult. Now, the second reason why you should get the Gh5 is the image quality. First of all, this thing is incredibly sharp. It can shoot 4K up to 60 frames per second, or even cinema 4K up to 60 frames per second. Now, 4K images from different cameras tend to be a little bit different, but I found that the Gh5 has a very sharp 4K image. Also, not only is it a sharp image, but more importantly, the colors are fantastic on this camera. People always rave about Canon colors, but in my opinion, the colors of the GH5 match or excel Canon colors, depending on the camera, of course. Overall, the image quality on the GH5 is mind-blowing, honestly. It is by far the best camera that I have ever used in terms of image quality, and that's saying a lot. Now, the third reason why you should definitely get a GH5 if you're looking for a camera for wedding videography or any other videography really, is the ergonomics. The ergonomics on this camera are unparalleled. This camera pretty much fits in your hand like a glove. It is fantastic. The buttons are all laid out very logically. They're all really easy to reach with one hand. And the best thing is, there is pretty much a button for every setting you could think of. In my opinion, the ergonomics of the GH5 are one of the best ergonomics in any camera out there currently. Now, the fourth reason you should consider buying the GH5 for wedding videography is the reliability of this camera. This camera is a tank. These things are made out of like solid magnesium or metal something. I don't know what it is, but these things are really solid. Now, with a lot of Canons, even the high-end Canons, you'll tap on it and it'll feel kind of plasticky. It's fine, they usually don't break, but they just don't feel as good as something like this GH5. Also, this camera is fully weather sealed, so you don't have to worry at all if you get it a little bit wet with a little splash of water or something like that happens. Obviously, this does not mean it's waterproof. Do not try to take this underwater, but it is fairly water resistant if you are out in the rain or if there's just a little splash from a puddle or something like that happens to get on your camera. Now, this camera almost never will overheat. I have not had a single time where this camera has ever overheated. Also, there is no recording limit, so you can record indefinitely, as long as you have plenty of batteries and SD cards available. This camera really is a wedding videography workhorse. It's extremely capable for almost everything you'll throw at it. Now, I see where people like Matt Johnson were coming from in listing their concerns about this camera, but to be honest, the price and all the other features far outweigh the cons. The GH5 is definitely worth it if you plan to shoot wedding videos or really any other type of video on a budget. Now, obviously, if you have more than say $2,000 to spend on a camera, you're just not gonna wanna get the GH5 because there are more modern cameras and better cameras out there. But that does not change the fact that the GH5 is one of the best cameras you can buy for the price, and even for many hundreds of dollars over the price. Now, speaking of price, you should never buy an expensive camera, even though I just told you to. Here's why.